I'm a developer with Calico Solutions, and I am going to be giving you a demo of my new feature, the Instant Violation Notice. So this is the mobile app. I know it doesn't look like it, but it's the Windows version of the mobile app. So one of the first things you might notice is that where this used to be inspections, it's now activities. And that is because when we're creating our new record type, the 101, it exists in the same space as the inspections. So when we click into here, we have these separated out just to make it a bit more clear that instant NOVCDs are not the same as inspections. So if we go into here, but before we do that, I should let you know that we don't currently have a way of enforcing the permissions that are on web on the mobile device. So part of the training that will have to happen surrounding this feature is making sure that new inspectors don't end up using this feature. And I'll show you a little bit more about why later. So let's click into here. Also, I do want to say, if any of you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat. Steph will be looking through them and will be reading them out to me at the end. The Instant NOVCD. Some of these tiles probably look a bit familiar to you, location, signatures, time in miles, but we do have a difference here, and that is respondent. And unlike with inspections, you're only able to have one respondent, and this person is going to be responsible for everything that's assigned on here. So from here, now that we have a respondent, we're able to add code sections. Until we have a respondent, we're not able to add code sections because it's going to be specifically tied to that respondent. So you may also notice that we don't have any violations currently listed here the way that you would see on an inspection. And that's because anything that's added here is actually going to be added as a violation, not just as a requirement. So when we add this one, the violation notice toggle automatically ticks on, because if someone is responsible for one or more violations, then they're going to be receiving a violation notice. And if you click into here, you'll notice that it's already marked as non-compliant, and you actually can't change that because anything on here is going to be a violation. However, you can add remarks and attachments. Cease and desists can be added manually, and if someone has a cease and desist, we also need to assign one of these 5 code sections. And I'll add another violation for good measure. So now that our respondent is responsible for something, we now have access to adding their signature. If we were to click into this beforehand, you would have the option to add the enforcing officer's signature, but you wouldn't be able to add one for Francisco because he hadn't done anything wrong yet. So we can, yeah, I know how signatures work. All right. let's go back here, and we also have our narratives panel. And this is dependent on what's actually assigned. So if we had only assigned them a violation notice, only the violation notice narrative would be here. But because we have both, we have both of them that we can enter. We'll move along to the review, print, and send screen. So this is where we're able to change the status to draft or in review. We're not able to close out here like with an inspection. And part of this is to enforce that we don't have the permissions on mobile, and so that prevents things from getting potentially a bit weird. So we also have the preview function, and I think that people will be able to use this fairly frequently out in the field, because the purpose of the Instant NOVCD is for when you're out and about and you see someone actively violating something. You're not actually doing a formal inspection or investigation, but you do want to issue them a violation notice or a cease and desist or both. And so while you're gathering their information, you can also click on the preview and show them something like this and say, you're going to be receiving a final version of this when I get back to the office. And you can also send this out in the field, but I think that the workflow tends to work better if you finish these on the web. And the main reason for that is once you send out the final version of the PRENF 101, it can cause some awkward situations if after speaking to a supervisor, you realize that you need to change something. Because if the respondent comes back and asks about it, then your records don't match what you were expecting. So for the meantime, we will go and sync here. Additionally, worth noting is that you're not able to delete a Instant NOVCD on mobile if an email has already been sent, because we need to make sure that there is that record there. It can be deleted on web, but not on mobile. So while I'm syncing that over here, we can move over to the web. So we also have a new search for the Instant NOVCDs. Even though they share the same numbering format as inspections, they're not inspections, so these are going to show up separately. And we also have some new permissions. These are a bit more granular than some of our previous ones, just to let people be a bit more specific with what they want their users to be able to do. For example, if you want them to be able to edit an Instant NOVCD, but you don't want them to be able to close. So moving back here. So one of those permissions was viewing, and if they didn't have the correct viewing permission, if a user didn't have a correct viewing permission, they wouldn't be able to see this grid or this button. They just wouldn't have access to it. And so if we go into here, and I believe we need to refresh now that the sync is complete. There's Francisco. So we can see that we have our information transferred over to here. We have our cease and desist, we have our violations and our violation notice, and we have our signatures. And if we had sent the PRENF 101 form from mobile, we would also have a copy of the final attachment here. So something else worth noting is that the Instant NOVCD is not actually the records of a cease and desist or a violation notice yet. This is essentially a way to prepare for creating those. And when those actually get created is when we close it out. And in order to close out, we need to have at least one violation or a cease and desist that has a section assigned or both. And we do, so we get prompted with this pop-up. And it allows us to select severities. And if all of the severities are at Class C or structural minor or a mix of the two, then the enforcement response that gets created is going to be automatically closed. However, if even one of them is Class B or moderate or A or serious, then the enforcement response is going to stay open. And this will give supervisors a chance to review or add any enforcement actions that they, any enforcement actions that need to be added. And then we have our last chance for the system to email the respondent for us. You do have the option to not send an email here, but if you do, then that means that you are responsible for sending the copy of the PRENF 101 form to the respondent in some other way, either over snail mail or fax or something like that. But once we complete this, it creates our enforcement response for us. So if we go over here, we now have our in-progress enforcement response because this violation over here, I assigned Class B. And so we're assuming that supervisors may need to review and may need to add some additional response actions. And you may notice that even though we did assign Francisco a cease and desist order, the cease and desist checkbox is not checked for how these are disposed. And that's because the cease and desist is not actually tied to either of these violations that I added. Those are disposed under the code section that I assigned the cease and desist order. And if we go over here and click into one of the response actions, we now have a copy of that PDF in its final form, and this is what Francisco would have received. So it automatically fills it out entirely with all of the information that you've provided it. It checks the correct code section, it lists the violations that we chose, and inputs the signatures. And if we did choose to email it, it automatically checks that it was sent via email on today. So let me check over my notes and see if there's anything that I missed, but I believe, sorry, I'm getting some feedback.
Yeah, it's probably someone who dialed in by phone, and I'm not able to mute those people.
Oh, okay. Do people have any questions? Steph, have people written anything?
Yep, there are 2 questions so far. First one is, in the field without Wi-Fi, is data required to enable this feature?
No. Um, the on the mobile app, it is already going to be on anyone's app as long as you have the most recent version of the app, and it is a mandatory update, so everyone will have it within 3 days and won't be able to sync without it. So it's not required. It's worth noting that the send PRENF 101 button doesn't send at that moment. It queues up the email and it will send on your next sync, which does require Wi-Fi connection.
Yeah, that's basically the same principle how the mobile app works for inspections. That it works in total offline mode, that you don't need Wi-Fi or data connection. You can sync up in the morning, do your work out in the field, and then once you're back on a data connection, Wi-Fi, Starbucks, or back in the office, you can sync your work up back into CalPEATS. So the Instant CD NOV works the same way in total offline mode.
And that does remind me of something that I should mention, that the Instant NOVCD does use the same sync process as the inspections. So the intended workflow is to either start on web or mobile and then finish on web. It's not really meant to ping pong back and forth between the two. So just be aware that if you do additional work on the Instant NOVCD on mobile after you've already done some work on the web, when you sync, you are still in danger of accidentally blowing away some of your data. So just be careful of that and try to go from mobile or web to web and hopefully not back and forth.
And the next question is, will we need to reassign add permissions with the new permission additions?
What kind of permissions?
So how do you deal with you mentioned a few new permissions for the new functionality.
Oh, yeah. So in order to add these, it will not automatically be added to anybody, so it will have to be added to an existing role or a new role. But if you do, then you can just scroll down to the bottom and the create, view, edit, all of the NOVCD permissions are here. And that does also remind me that we do have a slightly different way of deleting and handling instant NOVCDs. So, one moment. So we can just make a role like that. So we do allow people to delete instant NOVCDs, regardless of stage, even if they're closed, but someone does have to remove the created enforcement response and compliance actions in order to do so. But something that we don't currently allow is for instant NOVCDs to be reopened. And that's because when we do close these, the records get created. So opening and reclosing could cause some unnecessary data generation. But if I had deleted the enforcement response tied to this and the compliance actions tied to that enforcement response, I would be able to delete it because I also have the permission for deleting closed instant NOVCDs.
Does that answer your question, Jesse? I take that as a yes.
Yes.
Okay. Jose, your turn.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
I hear you.
So my question is on the violation severity, selecting the severity of the violation. Is the expectation that that is being done by the biologist before it goes to the supervisor? And is there a review process of the instant NOV at the supervisory level like there is for the inspections? And it's a two-part question. So
Okay. Yeah. And it definitely can be, because if we go back to the permissions, then we can create our role so that someone is able to, say, create instant NOVCDs and edit them and put them into draft or put them into review, but they're not able to close them. So county by county, you can kind of customize your review process since it does have an in-review state. So you could give one role to the biologist, letting them do everything up until moving past in review, and then you could have supervisors have permissions to do everything, including delete or redraft or close.
Let me rephrase the question. The way it's built in the flow of this process, the assignment of class A or minor or B, the classification of the violation, does that come in at the inspector level or after the inspector submits it for review to the supervisor?
So that is at the inspector level if the inspector has permission to actually get to the close screen. If you don't give them permission to get to the close screen, then they wouldn't be able to assign that. That could be something that is strictly done by supervisors if you give them permission to do it, but not inspectors.
Just to share, typically it's done at the supervisory level, not at the inspector level, but at least where I work. So we do need that function to be able to move out for the inspectors to submit the record. And when it's under the supervisor review, they get to, or the deputy, they get to classify the violation. The second part of the question, oh, go ahead.
Oh, just, yeah, you can definitely do that by assigning the permissions and making it so that inspectors can't, but supervisors can.
Okay, thank you. The second part is you mentioned that once it's classified a violation, if they're all class C or minor, that it automatically closes the enforcement. Can that be changed or reopened? Because sometimes there is additional enforcement. It is the commissioner's discretion to do enforcement even on class Cs or minor violations. Does the system allow you to reopen it and take a letter of warning or a NOPA if necessary on those minor or class C violations?
Definitely, yeah, you can reopen it and add additional enforcement actions if you need to.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
And the next question, can we link an instant NOVCD to a regular inspection form? And for further explanation, there are times we need to issue a cease and desist on the spot and require a number, violation notice number. If the instant NOVCD is generating a cease and desist number for us, we can use this to write on our hard copy NOV that we issue to the respondent on the spot, since the regular inspection form does not give us a cease and desist number, notice number, until after the inspection has been closed. So the question is, can we link an instant NOVCD to a regular inspection form?
I don't think that functionality currently exists, but we could bring up something like that to the tab.
Yeah, I have to think about that special case, Rosemary. And what we're going to do, we collect all those questions here and provide a written answer and send that out to this group. But as far as I know, this is currently not possible, but there might be a way to address that scenario that you're mentioning here. So stay tuned. We'll get back to you. Next question. I've missed this. Receive a copy of that video from today. Yeah, I will post it up to Vimeo and probably YouTube even, and send out the link to this email to the administrator distribution list. So I'll make sure, Tom, that you're in that list. And next question. On your example, it looked like a Class B violation got marked as disposed with just a violation notice marked.
Mm-hmm.
They not be disposed of until a decision report or other enforcement action is added to the enforcement response and closed. It looks like you would be able to close this enforcement response without an actual enforcement action for Class A or B violation.
So that is currently true. We tend to err on the side of trusting people to assign things correctly. And so while it is technically closable now, we are assuming that only people who have full understanding of how assigning severities should work is going to be using this. So while it is technically disposed, in that case, we would expect that somebody would add a decision report or NOPA or something before actually closing it properly.
Yeah, and CalPEATS is definitely not in the way of your professional judgment. And a system like that is not able to replace all the different special cases. So we rely on you and your expertise to actually do the right thing. If there's a decision report needed, you can easily reopen an enforcement response and do further enforcement actions,
Mm-hmm.
and then close it back out as Jose just pointed out or asked.
Yeah, and in this case, it wouldn't be closed unless someone decided to manually close it, because it starts in progress because there is something that is not minor or Class C.
And those were all the questions in the chat room. Oh, one more.
Oh.
What do we choose from the drop-down in the admin tab to enable inspectors to draw up an NOVCD? Edit it?
Oh. So they would need create and view and edit in order to actually create it. That would give them the base pieces to be able to see it and make it and be able to make changes to it. But if they don't have any other permissions, then they won't be able to delete it or move it any further than that.
Yeah, Michelle also mentioned with a supervisor approval status, so that might be a scenario we want to describe closer in the documentation on what permission settings we would recommend for that.
Okay.
Okay, are there any other questions? Can you issue an instant violation with an investigation?
No.
Short answer.
Yeah.
And an instant violation notice, that is basically handing out a PRENF 101 form without going through the hassle of starting an inspection or an investigation. So if you start an investigation, there's no advantage of this instant CD/NOV functionality, because you have your violation open already, and you just include violations that you then dispose through an enforcement response. So I don't see the real use case for that.
And part of what is helpful about the Instant NOVCD is that it only gathers as much information as is needed to actually populate that form. So while you can get the same effect in an inspection using the NOV and CD grid, if all you're looking to do is actually issue an NOVCD, then you can use the Instant NOVCD and save a little bit of time.
Yeah, a note from Eric, you can also add these permissions to an existing role, such as enforcements, in my opinion. In all the different counties, they have all kinds of different roles, and we can't get in the middle of messing around with the roles that you create in CalPEATS. That's why we decided to disable all the permissions by default, and then let counties decide how they want to enable that feature.
All right. If there's nothing else, then I think I'll call it here. Thank you all so much for attending my demo.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Emily.
All right. Have a good day, everyone.